This is Harry Judd for Boxing Social in association with Bet. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Clarke. We were both lucky to be at last weekend's fight in Manchester. We knew it was going to be a big fight between Joyce and Joseph Parker, but I don't think anyone realised it was going to be that good, Andy.
No, it was fantastic. It was one of those fights where in the build-up to it, most people you spoke to didn't seem to have any really clear idea on what was going to happen. I was certainly one of them. I thought it was a genuine 50-50 or as close to it as you ever get. I did favour Joyce slightly just because I do believe in that durability that he's got, that athleticism that he's got, that engine and that chin. And I think he's better than people maybe think he is, particularly on the basis of those previous two performances where he was very route one and just walked through everything that was thrown at him. And the argument was, well, he can't do that against a better heavyweight than Takam or Hammer. He'll get found out. And my thoughts were that he wouldn't do that, that he would, pay more attention to his defense. And that's all based really on the fact that I've been watching him for a really long time. And it's not that I kind of favour him, but you just get more of an idea of what somebody can do. But it was an amazing fight, because I remember in the second round saying to Spencer Oliver, who I was commentating with, that Parker he almost looked a bit shocked at how hard it had already got. But he just dug in there. He dug in there until the 11th and just kept going and kept going and kept going. And he was always in it because he was always catching Joyce absolutely clean with massive shots. And okay, he didn't at any point look like he was particularly hurt Joyce. But if you're Parker or if you're Andy Lee in the corner, you can very reasonably think he can't take these all night. The next one might be the one. And the next one is coming because we know we're going to catch him again. And in the end, it was almost exhaustion really that did for him. But it was a beautiful left hook from Joyce as well. And that was a good example of the fact that his technical skills are better, definitely, than people give him credit for.
I think people were surprised in the tempo, the pace, straight from the first bell. It was just all action, Andy.
It was, yeah. It was incredible to watch. Heavyweight boxing from ringside is always pretty amazing because you just get an idea of the power and the size of them and the impact. But that was another level, really, because there were just these huge shots being traded from the beginning all the way through to the 11th round. And when you're that close to it, you see just the sheer size of Joyce is pretty impressive, 19 and a half stone or thereabouts. And there was no spare on him at all. He's an unbelievable specimen. And although he does look a little bit slow and ponderous, he cuts off that ring pretty well. And it just means that if you're going to beat him, either you've got to knock him out, which would appear to be a really difficult thing to do, or you've got to beat him over 12 rounds. And 12 rounds with him is going to be hard, whoever you are.
You've known Joyce, obviously, for many years, and obviously during the GB days, even then. Has he silenced some critics finally this weekend? Because he's been criticised his whole career, Joyce, it seems.
Yeah, it's a strange one because, he was a really good amateur. He was on that GB setup for a long time. He was number one for Rio, got a silver medal. He beat Tony Yoka in that final. Nobody will ever convince me otherwise. I saw him get a bronze at the World Championships the year before, a gold at the Commonwealth Games. He had a very good record in WSB. I think he probably had about 20, 25 fights and maybe lost a couple. So that's stellar stuff. But somehow when he turned pro, there were other fighters getting much more of a fanfare than him. Boatsi was more celebrated, having won a bronze medal. Josh Kelly was getting a lot of attention. Anthony Fowler. Other fighters were just getting much more of a big press than Joe was. And I think his career's been guided really, really well because he started with a scheduled 10-rounder against Ian Lewison, who was a former British title challenger, a recent British title challenger at that point. And since then, they just clicked him through the levels. He's been on big fight nights, and he just has passed every single test. Dubois was a massive one because a lot of people fancied Dubois in that fight. And at that stage, if he'd lost, that would have been a huge setback because turning pro as late as he has, the problem is you can't really afford any setbacks. And he definitely couldn't afford one at that British European level. That could have been almost fatal for him, really, because it would have taken time to rebuild. But he won that fight and he won it comfortably. And surely now people have got to realise what he is, which is a world level operator. He was as an amateur and he is as a pro. And they can say whatever they want about the fact that he takes too many punches. You know, this isn't fencing. This isn't computer point scoring. This is prize fighting. And he does it his way. And if his way doesn't please everybody, if people don't think that, if it's so easy to stop him and so easy to hit him, why hasn't anybody done it? You know, that's the if the solution to the Joe Joyce problem is that straightforward, show me someone who can do it.
So that was for the WBO interim belt. I spoke to Frank afterwards. Usyk's not fighting until 2023. So Frank Warren says that Joe Joyce will be back out before then. You know, who would you like to see Joe Joyce in there with?
That's a good question. That it's a good question. He'll want to keep going at a high level, obviously. You think about somebody like Dillian White. You know, he would be the obvious choice, I would say. We'd heard rumours for quite a long time about Daniel Dubois, Dillian White, maybe for November time. That's gone quite quiet. So I'm guessing that's probably not happening. Joyce White would be. It's a terrific all British fight, isn't it? They stick that on pay-per-view and they do good numbers. I think that would be kind of the obvious one, really. Other than that, yeah, there aren't too many candidates. I mean, Andy Ruiz would be great. You know, he's just beaten Luis Ortiz. That'd be tremendous. But I think that would probably be quite difficult to achieve. You'd say the most achievable fight would be Dillian White. It'll come down to money. Everything comes down to money in the end, because he's probably in for a bit of a weight, Joyce, because Usyk was WBO mandatory challenger himself, wasn't he? So if they're going to go round in order, then it would be WBA, then IBF, then WBO. But hopefully we want to see a fight for undisputed. But if we do see one of them, assuming we get a winner, then the belts might splinter at that point. And that might be when he gets his opportunity, because at the minute, you would imagine he's kind of quite well back in the queue.
Where do you rank Joyce now in terms of top 5 heavyweights after Saturday's performance?
I think for me, my top 5 would be, I'd go Fury at number 1. I'd go Usyk at number 2. Most people go Joshua at number 3. I would probably put Wilder at number 3 myself. I would put Joshua at number 4. And then number 5, it's a bit of a toss-up for me, really, between Ruiz and Joyce. So some people would have him in there at 5. I'm kind of undecided about that. But people have kind of written Ruiz off a bit. They forget that relatively recently he was unified heavyweight champion of the world. And I think he did let himself down a bit in that second fight. But that doesn't mean that the first fight never happened. It definitely happened. You know, I was there. And he's beaten Luis Ortiz. So I think he's got a strong claim to 5 as well. But he's right on that borderline of the top 5 if he's not quite in it. But I think a lot of people would put him in it.
Joyce was, again, as he always is, up for any fight that's available. Joyce got hounded, as you'd expect, with questions and what's next. So-and-so's available, so-and-so's available. Obviously, with the Fury and AJ fight being very much in doubt, again, at the moment, we don't really know what's going on there. Joyce did say he'd fight Fury. Frank Warren, I think, winced a little bit, saying, look, give the guy a break. He's just been through a hell of a fight just now, but how do you see that fight playing out between Joyce and Fury? Seems like he wants to take them all, Andy.
Yeah, he does, and he always has. I think I'd love to see it. It's definitely not going to happen on December the 3rd. We'll see what happens with Fury AJ this week. Char's waiting in the wings, isn't he, basically? So we know what will happen if they don't manage to get that deal done. I think there's still a chance that they could, because the Monday deadline was imposed by Fury. Nobody else seemed to really endorse that. So I'd imagine conversations are ongoing. I still think there's a chance that it could happen. Obviously, we all hope it does. I do think that Fury would beat Joyce. But I think he would probably have to go back to a method of boxing that he doesn't really want to show us anymore, because the great strength, or one of the great strengths he's always had, obviously, Fury, is his mobility. And he showed us that in the first fight against Wilder. He boxed the move beautifully and very nearly won the fight. But he wasn't happy with that. Hence the shift in style for the second and the third fight, where he's been seek and destroy. And then he was the same against Dillian Whyte, looking for the knockout. He wants to give people entertainment. He wants to give them classic heavyweight stuff. And that does involve taking people out. So that's the way he wants to do it these days. But against Joyce, he might have to just row back on that slightly, because he has got the skills to keep Joyce turning and moving and miss him and beat him over 12 rounds. I don't see Fury knocking Joyce out myself, because I would say, again, he's in that category of very respectable puncher power-wise, probably more powerful than he's been previously. But on the evidence of what we've seen of Joyce so far, I would struggle to see Fury knocking him out, which means he's got to beat him on points. And if you're going to beat him on points, he's going to need to do it in the kind of old Fury fashion, I would say.
Away from the professional side of the sport, Sunday was extraordinary, to say the least. The Congress in Armenia, where 106 voted against a new election to challenge President Umar Kremlev, which puts Olympic boxing in further doubt after Paris 2024. Andy, what was your initial reaction, mate?
Well, I wasn't surprised that he won the vote of confidence. What did surprise me was, I think he would have been very confident he was going to win the vote of confidence. And that being the case, rather than have a vote of confidence or a vote to decide whether you would allow a vote for the presidential elections, why not just allow the vote? Because it just removes that layer of complication, because people will look at it and think, all right, so this was a vote to see if we could allow a vote. Why would you not allow a vote? Things need to be democratic, don't they? Without really understanding the kind of politics and the mechanics of the organization. So just allow the vote, and he'd have won it by the same margin he won the vote for the vote. And I think the thing would have been a lot clearer. Umar Kremlev has done an awful lot since he became president. You know, I've been involved in a lot of tournaments. I've not really spoken to him particularly, but I've been on the ground and been to events where he's, you know, supporting local projects. He's been to lots of countries, lots of national federations. He's been very, very busy, and that's going to provoke a lot of goodwill. And that was reflected in the results of the vote. And it would appear that he has tried to do almost everything that the IOC have been asking him to do with regards to investigating Rio. The judging, the officiating has definitely been better in the tournaments that I've been to. Just no doubt about that. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I think the treatment of the boxers has been good, as far as I can tell. The way the tournaments has been put on has been fantastic. But the IOC just don't really seem to be having it. They don't really seem to believe that, I guess quite simply, that he's doing what he's claimed to have done. And if they don't, they don't. There's not really, I don't really know what you can do about that. As I understand it, with the IOC sport committee, and they just think about which sports they really want in the Olympics purely on the merits of the sport and the history and the entertainment and the participation levels and the all-round appeal. They want boxing. And the local organizing committee, which will be Los Angeles in 2028, they want boxing too, because LA is a boxing city. You know, like the De La Hoya from East LA, you know, gold medalist, they would wheel him out, make a big thing of that. But the ethics committee at the IOC, they don't want it, because they look at what's happened in recent years and they don't want it. That's the word I get. So I don't really know what they do now. They'll be confident still, Aiba, that they could turn this around, because they always are whenever you speak to them. But I do think he's kind of making preparations for setting up Aiba boxing as being something that doesn't need the Olympics. I think that maybe is the longer term goal, that if they're not going to be readmitted, and they really want to be, I know that for a fact, they definitely want to be, but I think they might have got to the point where, not that they've given up, but they might be thinking to themselves, okay, but if I'm going to tell you that I've done all this stuff and you're just not going to accept it, what can we do? realistically, except for make our own plans. It's been coming for a long time, this, I'm afraid. It's been like watching a slow car crash, and I can totally understand the IOC's stance on it.
Again, for the people that don't know, in sort of what is the reason behind the Olympic Committee banning boxing? For people that don't know,
it's just Rio was a big moment because there has always been poor decisions in Olympic boxing. You know, you go back to Roy Jones back in the day, but there've been plenty of others besides that, and there have always been allegations of some form of corruption. And it's not just around the Olympics; it's been around certain situations regarding the governing body in other areas as well. I mean, I don't really know anything about other Olympic sports, to be honest, but is boxing the only Olympic sport that has judges where there are issues, where there have been issues? I find it hard to believe, but at the same time, I'm not trying to excuse it. The pointing over there and saying, "Well, what about them?" That's never a great argument. That's never satisfactory, but it's just something that's always occurred to me. But then in Rio, there were some stone cold absolute shockers. Overall, the standard of judging in that competition was good, but then Michael Conlan against Nikitin, the Russian fighter, was a terrible decision, and Michael Conlan gave the middle finger to the world basically from the ring, and that went around the world, and it attracted a lot of attention. There was a terrible decision in the heavyweight final as well between Evgeny Tishchenko and Vasily Levitt. Tishchenko, Russian fighter; Levitt, Kazakh fighter. Nikitin was a Russian fighter. And there were other decisions which he looked at and you thought were just a little bit beyond the pale. And after that, they really decided to look into things and insisted on reform. And they just don't feel, the IOC, like it's been done and that they've had all the time in the world to do it either, and it hasn't been done. And they've run out of patience. And as a result, on the initial list of sports for Los Angeles 2028, boxing is not on it, and then don't have control of the qualification system for Paris, which they didn't have for Tokyo, and it all just looks very, very bleak.
What effect will this have on amateur boxing? Because to my knowledge and my understanding, amateur boxing clubs in this country will not be affected by money. For example, they're funded by Sport England. It's GB Boxing that's funded by Sport UK. So will GB's boxing be affected by this, essentially?
Yeah, I'd imagine it must be. I don't know the answer to this for absolutely certain, but as I understand it, if you're an Olympic sport, then your funding comes from the fact that you are an Olympic sport, and you get medal quotas you're expected to fulfill. If you achieve them, then you retain your funding. If you exceed them, then I think your funding at least may increase. If you don't reach them, then it may decrease. But it's all about Olympic medals. And if you're not an Olympic sport, then logic would surely dictate that you are removed from that level. So whether GB boxing would be at the English Institute of Sport, if it were not to be an Olympic sport, and continue in its current format with that level of funding and resources, I would highly doubt that. It just doesn't seem really very feasible. So it's that kind of top end that will really be affected. And what that will mean is that fighters won't stay amateur for as long because they won't have the Olympics to aim for. They do still need that amateur grounding, I think. If you want to start boxing when you're 10 or 11, for example, you've got to go through amateur boxing. But it may be that they go into the ABA's fighters, or the NACs as they're called now, and they don't really look to take it too much further than that. So you'll have fighters turn over who aren't as seasoned, who aren't as technically schooled, who aren't as good, to be honest. And the overall standard will not be as good. It's just as simple as that. And you won't have this kind of great unveiling of Olympians as well being signed, and the fuss and attention that they get. It's kind of difficult to explain really to people how bad this is. And one thing that we could maybe do is promoters need to get hold of all the fighters they've got and ever have had who have won Olympic medals and seen their lives changed by the Olympics, and boxing needs to try to band together, to club together on this. Pro boxing is notoriously bad at that because it's so tribal and there are so many different factions. But everybody needs to understand that this is happening. You know, this isn't a possibility. This is happening unless something pretty significant occurs to stop it or to change the IOC's mind. It just kind of, I find it depressing, to be honest, just thinking about it. I've been in denial about it myself a bit, but I always knew that this day was probably, that it was getting closer. And it's really close now, because Paris is just less than 2 years away. And the next Olympics, you know, just less than 6 years away. That might seem like a long time, but in terms of preparations for these things, that's like it being tomorrow.
Yeah, I know many athletes at GB now, young athletes that are just part of the GB program. What do they do? Yeah, if Paris 2024, I know some people that went to the Commonwealth Games, and hopefully with some having great performances at the Commonwealth Games, hopefully they book their place for Paris 2024. But if you don't go to Paris 2024, where do you go? Do you just leave? What do you do?
Well, if you think you're not going to make it to Paris, to be honest with you, you may as well just turn pro now. And a few fighters will be thinking about that anyway, because the IOC have refused to create new gold medals over the last few Olympics. So there was 13 in 2008 in Beijing, 12 or 13, all men. In London, it was 10-3. Women's boxing came in. In Rio, it was 8-5. They don't want to create new gold medals. In Paris, it's 7-6. 7 weight divisions for the men. That's already meant that if you're a middleweight, for example, at 75 kgs, which has always been a classic division, your division's gone. So fighters like Lewis Richardson, for example, who I know a little bit, who's the number one at GB at 75, what does he do? He may as well turn pro now, because he can't go to the Olympics because his weight division's gone. So this has kind of already been happening. So fighters who would have been dreaming about Paris have been forced into thinking, well, what do I do? Because, you know, there's only 8 weight divisions, because they don't want to create new Olympic gold medals. And that's always been a red flag as well, that they maybe just don't value it longer term. But yeah, if you don't think you're going to make it to Paris now, fighters will be tempted to turn over, or they might just continue whilst their funding is still there, because you're on a great system up there and you will be learning a lot.
Let's talk about how big the Olympics is for the sport. How big was London 2012 for boxing in this country? I've seen it, especially at the grassroots level. Many people still going on about the Olympic Games. Look at Anthony Joshua. Look at that Sky Sports card, that the all-female card that we were both involved in at the O2. Look how many Olympians we had on there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example. You look at that card, you've got Claressa Shields, double Olympic gold medalist, Savannah Marshall, Olympian, Michaela Mayer, Olympian, Lauren Price, Karis Artingstall, Caroline Dubois. You know, you've got another gold medalist and bronze medalist and quarterfinalists right there. And what it does is it gives you this huge platform, so people know who you are when you turn professional. Anthony Joshua winning gold in London was obviously massive for his career, which which as a result turned out to be huge for boxing, because he turned over as a big name, massive spotlight on him, and he achieved so much in such a short space of time as a pro that, you know, that lifted British boxing up with all these stadium fights and all the rest of it. Luke Campbell, you know, he was another gold medalist. Nicola Adams, you know, these are big names. And the Commonwealth Games gets good coverage from the BBC, so that gives them some exposure as well. But it's nothing like the Olympics. I mean, look at the people who've won gold medals in the Olympics down the years: Muhammad Ali, you know, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Lennox Lewis. You know, Floyd Mayweather didn't get a gold, but he was an Olympian as well. And it's the dream for them all. You hardly meet a single fighter who didn't dream of going to the Olympic Games. It's just that big for them. It's got that history behind it. It's just absolutely unthinkable that it won't be there. But as things currently stand, it won't be there.
Where do we go now? What happens next? I know it's pretty bleak at the moment, and I pretty much know the answer, but in terms of people listening to this, what happens now?
I don't really know, to be honest with you, because the IOC didn't respond well to the result of the Congress in Armenia, and the most recent noises from AIBA do kind of suggest that, not that they've given up, but that, you know, it should be called IBA boxing, not Olympic boxing. And they withdrew the Val Barker Trophy, for example, from the Olympics in Tokyo. And the Val Barker Trophy, in case people don't know, is an IBA or IBA as it used to be called, award for the best boxer in the Olympics. But because they weren't really involved in the Olympics at all, because the qualification system was taken away from them, they withdrew that award, and they actually awarded it at the World Championships last year in Serbia to Andy Cruz. So they're making preparations for kind of life without the Olympics because they feel like they've done everything that they could have done. But the IOC have this kind of vendetta against them, the new regime, because what they keep saying as well is, listen, that wasn't us, Rio, right? That wasn't us. We're doing all the things you want us to do. What more do you want us to do? And they've maybe got to the point now where they feel it doesn't really matter what they do. The IOC feel like they've made it absolutely clear what they need to happen, but they've made it clear as well that it hasn't happened. So I think we're at an absolute face-off here. We're at a complete and utter stalemate. I'm afraid I just don't have any answers for you on it at all. And to be honest, I don't really know anyone who does.
Well, thanks so much for your time, man. I could talk about this all day with you, but again, it's very devastating news. But again, thank you very much for your time, mate.
No problem.